Yes, thank you for that introduction. I'd like to start on time because I'm half German, the top half. And we're going to jump right in here. So I love this quote, creativity is intelligence having fun. I think creativity and invention ought to be fun. So we're going to start out with an example of some creativity in the service of romance with the silent film star Buster Keaton. This is from over 100 years ago. And the story is he lives on the third floor of a building and he wants to elope with his girlfriend who lives on the third floor of the opposite building. Her father is very much against this and has locked her in a room. So here's where the creativity comes in. Okay. So many inventions from long ago seem to us to be completely obvious because they're so simple and we're so used to them. And I give a lot of talks of a PowerPoint type and I always make each slide be self-explanatory so it can be seen by somebody that's not here, say. So I'm mostly reading what's on there. But anyway, we're so used to these old inventions, we don't realize how much creativity was involved in them. But we can appreciate it if we looked at a few examples of how they were developed. And then later we'll see some very valuable ways of thinking that can make the process of problem solving much easier, which are based on an insight from philosophy, which I'll explain a little bit later. Now, the very best inventions are very simple, not like the funny Rube Goldberg ones that he made famous 100 years ago, of needless complexity. Here it's an invention that cools off the hot soup and the spoon he's about to put in his mouth. So we're going to look at a few simple inventions from the past, and they seem so obvious today, but they required mental leaps at their birth. Now, thinking outside the box is usually regarded as a metaphor, but there are actually some situations where there's a spatial region that you're going to think outside of. And a guy on the right is saying to his cat, never, ever think outside the box, the litter box. Now, in ancient Greece, vases were usually painted with scenes from Greek mythology, and you have on the right Helios, the sun god, driving his chariot across the sky. On the left is a scene from Homer's Odyssey with Odysseus and the Sirens. But sometimes it would not be obvious who the people were or what the scene was that you were supposed to know. So here's the invention. About 700 BC, a brilliant person invented the picture caption, a completely original idea back then. This ancient artist got the idea of putting the name of the person next to them on the vase so we would know who it was. And here's Ajax carrying the body of Achilles, a scene from Homer. And you can see to the left of him, vertically, the Greek, that's the name. After 700 BC, after this invention, people went crazy with it. And you see in the bottom, they labeled everything in sight. needlessly, but they love this idea. So that's the invention of the picture caption. And it required two new ideas. The first part is putting the name of something together with the picture. So words plus a picture, that's a new idea. The second idea is you don't put the name on the picture, you put it next to it. And that uses the region around the picture. It's a spatial, a way of thinking about the space around the picture. So those are the two ideas. Now, 200 years later, around 500 BC, somebody got the idea of showing speech by having words coming out of a person's mouth. You can see three examples of the speech coming out of their mouth and one example of the name next to them. That's a very, in my opinion, a very original idea. I mean, it's so obvious to us, but somebody thought of that. And now we're, if you look at the bottom right, we're used to political cartoons where you have captions of somebody saying something to somebody else. So that's an example of the very original idea from a long time ago. And now 2,700 years later, we have this cartoon here in the lower left with some words being said. And it never occurs to us that a lot of work went into the past, in the past, of this not obvious idea. All right, and by the way, that cartoon, now here's my plan. It turns out to be a famous cartoon. If you go to Google and type in cartoon, now here's my plan, you'll come up with that. It's from Shel Silverstein back in the 60s. So now we're going to look at a very simple invention that shows original thinking, and we'll start with something you probably never gave any thought to, which is a pair of glasses. And the history of how glasses and their frames develop gives examples of how you could have multiple solutions to a simple problem. How do you attach glasses to your body? This is a detail from a 1403 painting, and the man's using some of the very first eyeglasses, and he just holds them up to his face. At the time, this was an incredibly important invention of correcting your vision problems. At first, they were held up like this, and after a while, your arm gets tired. So the next thing that happened was somebody got the idea, let's put the lens on a stick, and I'll hold the stick down here so my arm doesn't get tired. So I'll be holding the stick and not the glasses. And it came in one lens and two lens versions of it. Then moving right along, I understand why this ever caught on. It pinches your nose a little bit in tension. It's not exactly balanced on your nose. And it could fall off. So they had a little string or chain that wouldn't catch it so it wouldn't fall on the floor because it's sort of unstable. And both Teddy and Franklin Roosevelt wore this. Then there's a monocle with or without a chain, and it's only for one eye, and it requires facial muscle control, and I would think you'd get a terrific headache if you had one of these on for a while. Now, it's hard to imagine that this idea of frames to go over the ears was not always obvious, but just think, the ears are not near the eyes. And this solution goes at right angles to the plane of the face. Unlike all the other previous solutions, it's really a new spatial idea. So in blue was the previous space where you could have monocles or holding up or I forget the name. Any of these other solutions were in front of the face, whereas the over the ears is a new idea of a space in back of the head. And it's amazing, really, that it took so long to think of that. You'd think somebody would immediately have come up with that. So what we like is a way of thinking available to us that when used, it could enhance your creativity. And that's discussed next. A way of systematically thinking that will enhance problem solving and creativity. And it's based on this philosopher here. On the left, you'd like to have this guy at a party, I'm sure. He looks like a real fun guy. He got got started in mathematics, and he was one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, a precursor to Sartre's existentialism. And phenomenology, which he sort of invented, it's a systematic way of examining certain aspects of human experience. And later, another person jumped off from that to make a modification of it. The psychologist Clark Moustakas. He refined some of these ideas of Husserl's phenomenology and developed his own thing called transcendental phenomenology. Looks like a German word. It's got so many letters in it. Mainly for therapeutic use, because he was basically a therapist. And the goal of transcendental phenomenology and basically phenomenology from Husserl, the goal is to have everything perceived freshly as if you'd never seen it before. A fresh experience. So that means approaching any experience while devoid of prejudices or, here's the main thing, any prior assumptions. And as Husserl put it, go back to the things themselves. Without ourselves, our personalities, and our history, getting in the way of us having direct, unmediated experiences. That was the goal. Now, this turns out to have an unexpected, to them, side effect of being great for creativity and problem solving, which you'll see in a minute. But anyway, you want to have these direct, unmediated experiences, not once several steps removed. So here's this proud grandmother out pushing a stroller. A passerby peeks in and says, "My, what a beautiful child." The grandmother says, "That's nothing, you should see the pictures." And seeing the baby is a direct experience, while seeing the pictures is not. So Husserl's insights, and this seems rather obvious, but is that perception depends on what's out there, reality, plus what we humans bring to it when we perceive it. In other words, we're adding something through the process of perception to what's out there. And here's the hard part. With practice, we can learn to see what is it that we're adding. Hidden assumptions, interpretations, which may or may not be unwarranted. And if they're not unwarranted, let's get rid of them and have a more direct experience without this overlay. So the goal is subtract off the stuff you don't need, and you're left with reality. So the goal is to strip down a problem presented to you, define the true problem that's not contaminated by an overlay of unjustified assumptions that either we or others who have put onto it. It's very hard to do because it's human nature to see things that aren't really there. In other words, through our perception, we're adding stuff, such as we see faces that aren't really there, right? And it's very hard to resist this. I mean, I don't think there's anybody who can see that and not see a face. And the reason is, starting immediately as very young babies, a large part of our developing brains is devoted to seeing and recognizing faces. Very important from a survival perspective. So here we see a face, but it turns out seeing the face depends on its orientation, which shows that the face is in us, not the picture. Because all we did is turn it around and all of a sudden the face is gone. The picture's still there, but we're different because we're not seeing that face. Now this is an extreme example of how a picture can fool our brains. It's almost beyond belief, but the tabletops are exactly the same size and shape. And the only way you convince yourself is you have to measure it. This is a phenomenal, it's not an illusion, it's a reality, but it shows that your brain can't really trust pictures. It's only take a second. This is the same as that. Exactly the same. And this is the same as that. So pictures can fool you. And we're going to see several examples where a picture is a key part of how a problem is presented to us. And that can be very misleading, these pictures. And so we need techniques to reduce what we are bringing to a problem that is maybe not part of the problem. And there are several methods of doing this it's like a systematic way of looking at a task of creativity or problem solving. These are 4 that are very useful. There could be others. One of them is change the orientation of a picture. Turn the picture around, and if you suddenly say the face is gone, then it means it wasn't in the picture, it was in us. Question hidden assumptions we bring to any picture. Restate a problem in terms of goals without stating the means to a goal. So if I say to you, I want you to go to Albuquerque tomorrow, I'm not telling you how to do it. So you have a lot more options. But if I said, take a drive there, I'm giving you the means. So the best problems are ones where you are given the freedom to find your own means. And the last one, try to identify limited choice options. And I'll give some examples of all these. So these tricks, mental tricks, will help us to think outside the box. And even better, they may help us not to get in the box in the first place. And these methods of thinking irritate some people because they're very comfortable in where they already are and would just like to be left alone. So there can be resistance to trying a new way of thinking, such as the person that lives in this box here. And that box was invented by 2 people that were pioneers in information theory, Claude Shannon and Marvin Minsky. They were just having fun. Okay, now here's an example. Changing the orientation makes a big difference. If you look on the left, we have a column of words, and the goal is to quickly say the color of the letters of these words. So green is the top one. And it takes a moment to do that because the reading is getting in the way. You're not asked to read. You're just asked to say what the colors are. So let's get rid of the reading. It's not part of the problem. Turn it upside down. And on the right, there's a column. It's much easier. I can just quickly say purple, yellow, red, brown, more blue, yellow, green. Okay? So we want to strip the task down to its bare minimums. There's another example. If you were asked to copy a signature, it's almost impossible to write in somebody else's style because we're so used to our own style. But if you turn it upside down, instead of copying letters, you're copying shapes, and you're not reading them. It still would be hard to do that, but it's an idea of changing the orientation. This is a very confusing picture. When I first saw it on the internet, I thought, what on earth is this? It's good to be confused when you see a picture. Have an open mind. What is it you're seeing? And try to reduce what I'm bringing to the picture. In this case, unwarranted assumptions. I'm not assuming it's anything. I'm open to anything. It looks like it could be a sheet of water, or glass, or fabric. I thought maybe it was from a hotel atrium or something. Now I'm going to rotate the picture. This is bad because now we're seeing stuff that isn't there. We're seeing a swimming pool. It's just water. The idea of swimming in it, we're bringing that to it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But if we want to reduce things to their essence, we want to reduce these overlays that are not part of the thing. So here we're using familiar sights to interpret, understand the picture, but the picture is not changed. We're changed. Our perception has changed. Now, there's some very peculiar ways of thinking in the ancient world that it's hard for us to even imagine. For example, here's a funny riddle. where the humor would be completely lost on people from 100,000 years ago. The funny riddle is this: which is more useful, the sun or the moon? The answer is the moon is more useful because the moon shines at night when it's dark. The sun only shines during the day when it's already light outside. Now we see the humor in that, thinking that the light of the day is unrelated to the sun. That's exactly what people used to think. In fact, it's in the first few lines of the Bible, in mythologies around the world. First light is created, then maybe days later they get around to creating the sun. Now, why would they think this? Well, here's why. Look at the picture on the upper right. Imagine you're outside a little before sunrise. The dark sky slowly becomes a little less dark, and after a while, a dim glow appears on the horizon. The sky lightens up. Some clouds may start to glow with light, like on the left. There's more and more light, and yet there's no sun in sight anywhere. Just before the sun comes over the horizon, the sky's almost completely lit up. So maybe the sun is adding extra light, but it was already light outside. And on the other end, when sun sets, it stays light long after the sun is below the horizon. So they do not assume any connection between the sun and the light outside. We do because we know better. But this first few lines of the Bible shows this happening. Actually, the first line or two, God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. Then on the fourth day, he gets around to creating the sun, the stars, and the moon. And not for the purposes of light, for the purposes of marking the seasons and the calendar. Okay, now in every day, most time-wise of every single day, we have to make constantly many assumptions in order to safely navigate our way through life, whether or not they're valid. We have to do it. Usually they are valid. Here, we're going to see, I hope the sound works on this, I'm not sure. You might think these two people were just having fun. It's probably a good idea to assume otherwise, warranted or not, and intervene. Okay? Nope, no sound. Okay. The sound isn't really important. Okay, so there he assumed correctly that there's something was off there. And what we need to be able to do is, during the normal day, we make all these assumptions. But if you're in a problem-solving situation, and you're trying to be creative, you need to temporarily put your ordinary thinking on hold and do these special ways of thinking. And as I said, some people find this irritating. Now on the left, you want to question everything. On the left, welcome, National Society of Skeptics. The guy on the left says, "I don't believe we met." The other guy says, "I don't believe you don't believe we met." And on the right, somebody's reading their favorite magazine, Plots and Cover-Ups Monthly. And the other guy says those ludicrous conspiracy theories are just a smokescreen to hide the incredible truth. So question everything. Here's an example. And one of the things you should do is, at the very first time you encounter something, start to watch carefully. Are you starting to make assumptions? Don't wait until you've already made them or well into it. You've probably all seen pictures like this when we were kids or later. You're supposed to compare the two pictures and find 8 differences. Usually it's very tiny little differences. Since this is a simple picture, it ought to be easy to find it. The first assumption we make is, we've seen this kind of thing before, and therefore this is one of these. But that's an unwarranted assumption. Don't make unwarranted assumptions. It's quite different from the usual kind in a humorous way that surprises our expectations. And we don't have time to wait for you to look at the spider in the upper picture. It has 8 legs. They're good. Okay. It would have taken me forever, but I didn't. And this is another great one of Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin says to Hobbes, "You want to see something weird? Watch. You put bread in this slot and push down this lever. In a few moments, toast pops up." And Hobbes says, "Wow, where's the bread go? That beats me. Isn't that weird?" So here, the best approach is to try to be very stupid when understanding a problem, but very smart in solving it. So the first step is the hardest one. To act like a complete idiot and need all the assumptions, implicit or explicit, spelled out to you in detail. And during that process, you may start to spot things. Well, wait a minute, that doesn't have to be. So that's having to explain to you. Once you think you really understand it, then you want to be smart in solving it. So here, the white bread disappears and the brown toast appears in its place. Don't assume they're the versions of the same thing. They may be, maybe not. Fight making those assumptions without hard evidence to back it up. Now here's an example of identifying limited choice assumptions. Often you're given limited choices that you didn't make the choices. You didn't give yourself the options. Somebody else says, either do this or that. So here on the left, the stick-up man says your money or your life. Now that turns out to be a false choice. He's saying there's only two things. On the right, here's something where I'm constructing the choices. Give him my money, he'll shoot me, or run away or fight me. This may not be realistic, but there are other options. So you want to move away from limited choices, especially if you unwittingly gave yourself limitations. Now, suppose somebody asks you to slap your knee. Unthinkingly, you probably do like that. And that's what I would do. Okay, now, instead, somebody asks you to slap your knee and you think from it. You think, well, okay, I could have done this or that, or that, or that. So that's 4 different ways of doing it. Or I could have done 5, 6, 7, 8. That's all with my right hand. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay? He's hitting them all. So you get the idea. All right, now here's another picture test, you might say. Here's a puzzle. 2 babies were born from the same biological mother and father on the same date, same time of day, in the same place, yet they're not twins. How is this possible? We probably all heard puzzles like this before, and we assume that this is like those. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it's a lot easier to get the answer without the picture. If you were just told this, you'd find the answer much quicker. Pictures often cause us to make unwarranted assumptions. The answer to the puzzle is there's another child, they're triplets. They're not twins. The puzzle never mentioned pairs. The picture does, but the words say nothing about 2. In fact, let's see, does it even? Well, 2 babies were born, okay. Anyway, actually, I have triplet grandchildren. All 3 are now 19, just started college, California. All right, so a picture can give you tunnel vision and lead you to unwarranted assumptions. Now, what's worse than seeing a worm in an apple? Seeing half a worm, right? Now imagine biting into an apple and you see half a worm sticking out. You must have the other half in your mouth. Yuck, right? But worse, imagine you take a bite out of an apple and you see a quarter of a worm wiggling around, trying to get out. You must have 3/4 of a worm in your mouth. Double yuck. Worst of all, imagine you take a bite out of an apple and you see no worm at all sticking out. Triple yuck. You must have a whole worm in your mouth, right? Wrong. Don't assume that the sequence of 100%, 50% of a worm always has the same meaning. The last one doesn't. And that's a common mistake people make. They see a series of something that seems to be following some pattern. They assume the whole series does. Here, it doesn't. There's another puzzle. again, with a very misleading picture. The challenge is to pick up a piece of rope, hold it in both hands, and then tie a knot in it. And it seems to be, without letting go of the rope. It seems to be topologically impossible. There's no way you can do that. So you think, well, it's impossible. It's quite possible if you ignore the picture. The problem is stated without the picture does not say anything about how the rope is to be picked up. That's where the answer is. The picture gives you immediate tunnel vision. So I have a knot in my hands. And it's transferred to the rope. Okay, so that would be right. So that's the solution. It's all involves how you pick up the rope, and the puzzle said nothing about that. It just says, pick up a piece of rope, don't let go of it when you tie the knot. A related thing to what I just did is taking off a pullover. I don't think it's possible to take a t-shirt and just go like this and bring it over your head. You sort of have to do this thing, I think. There's nothing obvious about that. The first person to do it must have tried different things. What I don't get is if this is how we take it off, how come we don't put it on that way? We don't, right? I don't think. Anyway, so the creativity involves, in this case, thinking outside the box. And this is the rope thing I love because the picture is so misleading, which I should not have shown. You see that picture and you say, oh, it can't be done. Okay, now here's another one. This is no picture. Questioning assumptions. Most adults, I'd probably say all adults, get this extremely simple problem wrong on the first try. How many 9s are there between 1 and 100? And most of people immediately think it was 9, 19, 29, 30, counting on their fingers, up to 99. So they either say 10, because that's how the sequence is, or 11, when they realize that 99 is 2 9s. Wrong answer. We're assuming that all the terms are the same type of thing. What about 90, 91, 92, 93, 90? So the answer is 20. Nobody gets that right first time, or the second time. It's not obvious. So there again, we're making an assumption that the series continues a certain way. Okay. Now we're jumping around a lot because there's important themes that aren't that connected. And the next thing shows one of the simplest modern inventions I've ever seen. It's by a magician named Sylvester the Jester, a genius inventor. It allows you to take a 2.5 meter long pole from a small space, like a hat, and I've got one here. You may have ideas about how this is done, but it's important to know the pole diameter is exactly the same the whole length. It's not telescoping like this, where it's thicker at one end. It's exactly the same diameter, the whole length. There's no telescoping action. There's no accordion-like folding back and forth when it's inside the hat or small box. And we'll see a video of some kid in, I think, Denmark, doing it. Any ideas? It has a wood grain, folk wood grain on the surface. Yeah, good. All right, so this guy you're going to see, Sylvester the Jester, has several other products that use the same principle. You're going to demonstrate called the giant mallet. And again, there's no telescoping of anything. There's no inflating, no folds of the long pole.
Step over the border to loony disorder. Sylvester the Jester is here to shatter the silence.
Hi there, I'm Dan Sylvester, and you probably know me as Sylvester the Jester. You can tell by the hat. Well, today I'm going to be presenting something new, but bigger. It's called the giant mallet. You might have seen the Insto mallet. Well, this is the same thing, but it's gigantic. Twice as much, it's spectacular, twice as much mallet for the same amount of money. No, it's not. It's the same, it's more money than the old one. It's bigger, but twice as much mallet, but just as much fun. I'm going to show you a new product today. First, I'm going to show you an old product, one that's been on the market for a while. It's one of these Insto mallets. Oh, they're lots of fun. And you can kill somebody with it, too. That's the best part. But it was a great idea. They're selling great. But I thought, bigger is better. So that's why I came up with this. Every bit as good and even more spectacular. It's called the Jumbo Mallet, or Giant Mallet. Hey, you could kill something really large with that. Let me get. Sorry, George. Okay, and it comes, and you can do it different ways. You can do it with the little box. Oh, what's inside here? And then you pull out. Whoa, one of these. Yeah, kind of crazy. It's also another giant mallet. And then they have that, and here's the actual giant mallet box. You could do it this way too, and it's lots of fun. Imagine this: you come on stage. Ooh, what have I got inside here? And then you take out a 10-foot pole. No, it's not a 10-foot pole. It's another giant mallet. Look at that. Boy, that one there. I mean, that's that thing. That'd knock out a giant. You could ring the bell with that. Anyhow, that is called the giant mallet. Really quick, they're gonna be up and on my website soon, so check it out. The Giant Mallet by Sylvester the Jester. Thank you very much. Hope you buy 100 of them.
Okay, that's just one of his amazing inventions. Let me quickly get back into what I was doing, which is the slideshow, and then I'll go forward. Let's see if this works. Oh, now I'm going to actually wait until the end to demonstrate the pole, but you can look at it close up when the talk is done. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a few very simple examples of inventions, not some by me, some not, in my own field of optical design. And I've been doing that for 58 years now, starting with my first job when I was 22. I retired a few weeks ago. So I've been doing it a long time, and I've seen a lot of changes in myself and in my field. So I started out, that's me on the lower left, when I was kind of unsophisticated. But now, of course, I'm completely different. So the first, I think the first thing I'm going to show is from my very early years. And it's a very simple invention. But when I first started work, I realized that although computers had completely revolutionized my field with enormous number crunching, unconceivable, which used to have to be done by hand with 6-place logarithm tables, took forever. So everyone welcomed computers when they came along. But the bad part of the computers is a lot of people stopped thinking. Let the computers do everything. And I realized that your brain is its own computer with many nice features. On the left, it's free, good for 16 hours a day, it's user-friendly, familiar language, you don't have to learn something new. It's portable, time-sharing capability, I do that all the time, color monitor, and the best of all, no ads at all. So my entry into the field was to see what can I still do despite all these computers out there. So here's an example. It's one of my first inventions, 1975. It's a simple reflecting telescope. You see this picture everywhere. It has 2 parts. On the right, there's a large concave mirror called the primary mirror. Light comes in, hits the mirror, focuses down to a small convex mirror, and then the light comes out through a hole in the primary mirror. And on the image that's formed at the focus, you can either have an eyepiece or some film or hook up your camera to it, whatever. So this diagram is shown everywhere. And this type of telescope, a Cassegrain, has been around since 1632. It turns out the picture has a hidden assumption. And you could stare at that for 100 years and it never occurred to you. What's the hidden assumption? Well, it's an optical diagram, but there's something in it that's not optics. It's the hole in the mirror to let the light out. That's not an optical surface. That's a hidden assumption that there's a hole. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's just see what happens if you only consider the optics. Don't have a hole. It's not part of the optics. Don't assume it. See what happens. And what happens is without the hole, the light reflects again at the first mirror. So it comes in, hits the first mirror, goes down to the second one, comes back and hits the first mirror again, and then exits through a hole in the small mirror. That leads to a new kind of design. It's a new idea. You still, in this case, need a hole to get the light out from the small mirror. So it turns out, if you look in the lower picture there, the classical Cassegrain with two reflections, it cannot be well corrected for image aberrations that determine how sharp the image is, except for very small image sizes, disappointingly small. But the new design with three reflections has more variables, and it can correct for more image aberrations, give a much larger, sharp image size. So I thought of this in 1975, a new kind of telescope. A further insight is I say, well, what if there's now a hole in the second mirror? Then what happens? Well, then it's going to bounce again. In fact, it could keep going back and forth forever. So we said, well, let's look at what happens with just two mirrors, multiple reflections. Does anything useful pop up? And it turns out there is. And here's a good tip. If you get some interesting new idea, it's a very human nature to say, okay, let's see what I can do with that. And in the first example that you can make it work, to get in and start working with it. It's much better to see where that idea could, to run with it in other areas. You can always come back to your first wish to actually start doing it. This is a little complicated. So it turns out with two spherical mirrors and four reflections, the light goes up, hits the one, and it goes up again and down, and anyway. With four reflections, you have even more variables, and you can correct more image aberrations. So you get a sharper image, and it's just a new thing that nobody had done before. And no computer would do this. It just took somebody thinking about it. And I always liked telescopes because that's how I got my start. When I was 13, I ground and polished it's the only time I ever made anything in my life practically. Made a telescope mirror, and because I liked astronomy. So I always had a soft spot in my heart and my head for telescopes. And you may have seen in the news, there's some monster telescopes that are being built or projected to be built. And there's a new one in Hawaii, 30-meter mirror. It's not a single piece, it's a lot of segments, almost 500 segments. Huge, and would be much sharper and see much further than the Hubble or the Webb telescope. Huge thing, cost a fortune. So I've done designs for this. Not so much the telescope itself, but some of the instruments, which are also huge. It turns out this is held up because in Hawaii, it's on a mountain, and the indigenous Hawaiians regard the mountain as sacred, and they don't want anything further to be built there. So it's sort of not clear what's going to happen. Okay. In 1976, a year after I got that patent of this thing, a year later, I was asked to do some design work on some early experiments in laser fusion. And the picture there is the inside of the target chamber of today's laser fusion device in Rochester, University of Rochester. This huge thing, I mean, not just that, the whole thing is this monster complex, is to hit that, something that size. Can you hardly see it? Anyway, so laser fusion, in the early days, I got in on the ground floor, and I was shown a picture, and I just stared at that picture one afternoon, and suddenly something hit me. And a new idea of questioning something in the picture, which I'll get to in a second. Now, it turns out laser fusion, if it ever works, it'll be about as cost-effective a way to produce energy as it will be to go to the moon to get sand for your kid's sandbox. It'll be roughly equivalent. The main use, if it works, will be to test the physics of new nuclear bombs, because we have a treaty that you can't test, bombs in real life, but you can simulate them on the computer, or you can test aspects of them with one of these laser fusion things. So the target pellet is about that big, filled with tritium gas, and all you have to do is just heat it up to 100 million degrees. And my kitchen oven at home only goes up to 450 degrees. So this is seriously hot, 100 million degrees. The main problem with laser fusion, or tokamak fusion, which doesn't use light, it's more plasma contained with giant magnets, it takes an enormous amount of energy going into the system to make it work. And what you get back is like, less than 1%. It's extremely inefficient. It's not a good bet for the future. And there's a lot of hype about, there's been a lot of news about some breakthrough where they finally got more energy back than they put in. It's all fake. Because maybe they put in, say, 1 watt and they get back 2 watts. But to get that 1 watt may have taken 100 watts going into the lasers. So it's just crazy. Anyway, so back when I got involved, everything was much simpler. And I'm showing a cross-section of this first device with a target pellet. And let's see if I can actually make this thing work. Turn it on. Does this work? Yeah. Oh, but you won't see it on the screen, so it doesn't matter. Okay, forget it. All right. Oh, can you see the cursor? No, you don't see a cursor either. Okay. Anyway, so you've got these 2 laser beams, incredibly powerful, coming in from opposite directions to this system you're seeing. And let's take the one on the left. This incredibly powerful light beam comes in and hits this lens, single lens with a highly deformed shape on it. Not a sphere, not a conic, some crazy shape. It cost a fortune to make that shape. But the result is it brings that laser light down to a single point, which then goes into this mirror cavity, goes up, hits another mirror, and is focused down onto the target pellet. An identical thing comes in on the other side. Incredible powerful comes in, does the same thing. So now you get these intensely powerful rays all hitting the target pellet, and they have to hit at the same time, or the thing doesn't work. Anyway, the problem was the energy of the laser is so intense that that lens heats up, and it often heats up enough to explode. So there your incredibly expensive lens has exploded. Not good. So they asked me to get involved in this. And I looked at this picture, something like it, back in 1976, for a long time, and I suddenly said, wait a minute, there's an assumption in this picture. There's something here that's not the optics. It's actually 2 things. There's the holes in the mirror, and there's a target pellet. The target pellet is not part of the optics. What happens if I only look at the optics? What happens if I pull out the target pellet? Just see what happens. And what happens is, and I'm only showing a single ray here, single ray would come in, go down, hit the mirror, up to the other mirror. No, only hits one mirror and then hits the target pellet. But if you pull that out, it goes up again, and it exits the system. It's kind of hard to explain this with a diagram. I realized with an extra reflection, there might be some advantage. And it turns out there is. And without the laser and some cursor, I can't really show you too much. Actually, I'll walk over there, real brief. So the laser beam comes in, hits the lens, forms a point, goes up to this mirror, and here's a focus, but it's not at the target point, the focus here. Then the rays go and hit the other mirror, and now they come to the target pellet. And that turns out to divide up the work of turning these rays coming in to like this, into 2 stages. And by dividing the work up in here to 2 stages, it turns out much less is required of the lens. And this angle is much better than the previous design. Oopsie. So the original design has these fat lenses, very expensive. The new design, and it's too much to absorb hearing it this fast, but the lens heating was much less. It didn't explode. It was much cheaper. And again, it was just a matter of looking at a diagram a long time and starting to question parts of it. Okay, now I'm jumping around, you can see. Now this is a comparison, different subject now, of the Galilean and Kepler types of telescope. And here I'm comparing them for the very low magnification of 2x, which is almost nothing. The Galilean one is on the bottom. You've got a big positive lens. The light starts to focus, but is caught by a negative lens and straighten out again. So you have parallel light coming in, parallel light coming out, and then you put your eye there. The Kepler one, which turns out that everything is done these days with Kepler, the only use I know about the Galilean is your dentist uses, or a doctor, those things they wear for reasons I don't have time to explain. So the Kepler has a positive lens, it forms an image, and then there's another positive lens that turns the light parallel. Now the reason I'm showing this is it turns out the Galilean one, when you look through it, you see things right side up and right and left the way they really are. With the Kepler, if you look in, everything's upside down, right and left reversed. Now if you're looking at the sky, who cares? But if you're looking, landscape or something, you don't want to see it upside down. So something extra is needed in the Kepler, some extra piece to turn things around. And that turns out to be what's done with binoculars. So on the left we see binoculars, and they basically are this Kepler type, where on the bottom of the right picture, the light comes in from the bottom in that picture. You've got these positive lenses, and then the right light path goes into 2 prisms that are oriented in a way to turn the upside down image the right way and to turn the right and left and fix everything up, and then send the rays to the eyepiece and then into your eye. So that's what binoculars are. They've got these prisms inside. Now you'll see, again, I'm leaving, you'll see the light path comes in and then goes sideways and comes up here. And because of that, think of it going the other way, from your eye coming down. The distance between these has to be bigger than this distance to your eye, because you come in and then have to get into your eye. And that's why binoculars are wider here than they are there, and they're kind of big and clunky. Now it turns out, although that's the standard type, still made today everywhere, a more expensive version with a new idea, not my idea, has also been around for a while, is this on the right. And the reason that is different in shape is it has a different kind of prism inside that does not have to bend things sideways. You can see it's got a more complicated bouncing around inside this prism. It allows the light path to go straight, unlike the binoculars where it goes and it's sideways. Anyway, this new kind of prism It's more expensive. And that's why these generally will be a more expensive kind of binocular. But look, it's much more compact, much easier to carry around, okay? Now we're going to get to this new idea, not my idea, I wish I thought of it, so obvious. If you take binoculars and you saw them in half, you get these two sides, right? Well, they're independent. They have nothing really to do with each other, one for one eye, one for the other. They just happen to be connected so you don't have to have both hands involved in holding it. And I actually have one of these half things I meant to bring with me. It just works just the same as the two of them. Anyway, either half could be used independently. Okay, now what if you did saw them in half? And this is where somebody got a great idea. Okay, now what if I put them back together? I saw them in half and I put them back together. But put them back in a different way. And this is what, it's just so incredibly obvious. It pains me, it's so obvious. That's the normal way, like this, saw it in half. But instead of putting them like that, put them reverse. And when you do that, now, these are close together. Much closer than over there. It's the same system, basically, same optics. Each eye is still working independently. Each optics is independent. But the shape of the thing, much more compact. And you get something that looks like this, which is even smaller than the other ones. And a funny thing is, if you put these out for somebody to pick up who's never seen them before, all other binoculars, when you pick them up, you put your eye at the small end. Here you put it at the big end. Okay. And this shows how all three types are to the same scale if they were the same magnification and aperture size. So this third one, it's just conceptually a beautiful thing. You don't see these very often. And it's no more expensive than the one on the far left. It's just a matter of putting it together in a different order. Okay, let me just quickly see how we're doing here. Yeah, perfect. Almost done. Almost not done. Okay, now, this is all easy stuff. But what I mostly do is very complicated designs. You've probably all seen this thing on the left. Find X, where you're given the sides of a triangle. You know, there it is, easy to find X. For the complicated things, it's harder to use the phenomenological way of thinking, but still quite useful. So this is my big career achievement. I worked with Carl Zeiss for 25 years as an independent consultant, doing mostly designs for computer chip lithography. And the best invention I came up with 20 years ago is shown here, and it's used to make all the computer chips in the world today, all of them, no exceptions. And it's this very complicated optical system, much more complicated than what I was showing before, and the lines are light rays, and then the lenses are, anyway. For the most advanced chips today, the surfaces have to be made accurate to a few atoms, which is beyond conception. How is that even possible to think about? A few atoms. Incredible precision, and because it's so difficult to do that, only Zeiss can do it. That system there, each one sells for $50 million, and they've sold well over 1,000 of them. Over $50 billion of just the optics, which then goes to a company in Holland where it's put into a much bigger machine with electronics, mechanics, and stuff. But the pure optics sells for $50 million each. So that was my big thing. And this precision is just beyond belief, which reminds me, a family was visiting a museum looking at a dinosaur, and the museum guard says, you know, that skeleton is 90 million and 4 years old. And the family says, well, I meant the first, 90 million and 4, how can you be so precise? And the guard says, I started work here 4 years ago, and they told me back then it was 90 million years old. Okay, now we're going to end with a creativity exercise for right now. It's very fun, challenging, but fun. And the exercise is write a 6-word story. And the famous example of this is from Ernest Hemingway. And his story in 6 words is, for sale, baby shoes, never worn. It's not just a story, it's amazing, very poignant, very impressive. A funny one from the great wit Dorothy Parker says, brevity is the soul of lingerie. And she got her career start. She was hired to write ads for lingerie company. And she put that in, and her career took off from that point. Now, for this exercise, before you try it, the first thing you should do, don't jump in and start doing it, is think of everything you might be assuming about the task. That's the key thing. Don't jump in and do things right away. Take your time. First, look at it without actually trying to solve it. Try to write down everything you can think of that results from not making assumptions. And here's an example. Write a 6-word story. It doesn't say you can't use non-words like emojis. You could use pictures. It doesn't say you can't do that. Don't assume you can't use pictures. And this is a wonderful quote, terrific advice. Einstein says, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. That's a genius, from a genius, idea. Spend most of your time thinking about it, not trying to solve it. Then after you've blanketed all possible ways of approaching it, then you can do it quickly, okay? But it goes against human nature. Now, real quick, here's some ideas about ways to approach the problem. On the upper left, it says 6 words. Doesn't mean you couldn't repeat words. You could say, well, maybe they just meant 6 separate words. So, too hot, too cold, too hot, too cold, too hot, too cold, just right. That's 6 separate words, but many total words are different. Or the emojis. I was feeling sad, now I'm happy. Didn't say it has to be in English. You could use Julius Caesar's thing about all Gauls divided into 3 parts. It turns out 7 words, assuming. Or you could write it in Sanskrit. Asid Raja Nalanama Virasena Sutubali. There once was a king named Raja, son of the great Virasena. You could cheat. Maybe it's worth a try. Maybe they'll accept your solution with 5 words. Somebody says, I can do it in 5. Or, and this is really cheating, there's no story in the last one. Different words for 6 in different languages. 6, sex, different things. Anyway, or you can imply extra words. I try to always finish what you could use humor. This is a famous one from the New York tabloids. Headless body found in topless bar. Or, this is my favorite tabloid one, falling skydiver eaten by starving birds. There's a lot of creativity went into that one. And here's some examples. It's still you, always will be. Found true love, married somebody else. To be or not to be. Starlet sex scandal, giant squid involved. In the beginning, there was light. It's been a hard day's night. Time travelers wanted. Inquire within yesterday. Under my bed, he still waits. Belly flopped into the pool, emptied it. I like this one. Upside down, it says, dug too deep, stuck in China. It's all upside down. But the most creative, in my opinion, is the one in the bottom where it's a redacted text. Trust, the government, but everything is fine. Very clever. And a tip is first get an idea without worrying about the number of words, like maybe 9 or 10 words. Then you rearrange the order, do some pruning. You might be able to get down to 6. But first get an idea. And one idea is a theme about your own life. So here's some examples. First one, shy kid, made telescope, found career. That's me. Or this, sought riches, got it, empty feeling. Or found love, lost love, what next? Life's a joke, then we croak. Or refer to the context of the original thing of Ernest Hemingway. Explanation, the baby shoes were the wrong color. Right? Okay, and we're almost done, finished now. Punctuation can give emphasis and meaning without adding words. Now this is an extreme thing. There can't be anything more extreme than this. Look at it. James, while John had a better effect on the teacher. You put in the punctuation. James, while John had a better effect on the teacher. Nobody could exceed that. When I saw that, I thought it was amazing. Okay, so that's the end of my time. Good.